Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Richard Boyd Barrett.
With Deputy Barry, Chair. And can I just clarify? Do we need to move our amendments now?
No,
No.
you can't move. You can debate and discuss it, but you can't move it until amendment number 2 has been disposed of.
Okay, but I can talk to them.
Oh, absolutely. You can speak to the amendment.
Okay. As socialists and as internationalists, our imperative in the whole Brexit drama is twofold. One, to protect the interests of working people, and two, to oppose any effort or attempt to impose a border, north and south. And those two immediate imperatives flow from more general principles that we hold, which are internationalist in outlook, that we think borders divide people. Whether they're borders north-south, whether they're borders east-west, or whether they're borders around Fortress Europe. We don't like borders because they divide people, they set people against one another, they encourage people to see themselves in competition with one another. And workers always lose because of that. So that is our guiding principle, and it is the logic behind the position we will take in relation to the motion before us. In relation to the question of the north-south border, the government and the officials have achieved something significant. There's no doubt about it. In getting a commitment not to have a hard border, or to avoid a hard border, to be strictly accurate about what's in it, to avoid a hard border, that is an achievement. And for that reason, we certainly would not oppose this motion. However, we don't have the same guarantees about the fate of workers in the Brexit drama, and I noticed that the ICTU came out today, albeit supporting the agreement, but their slogan, I think, was a good slogan, which was, workers should not pay the price for Brexit. That's an important thought, and one that hasn't been discussed sufficiently throughout the Brexit drama, because of course, as Naomi Klein pointed out in relation to the economic collapse, there is a thing these days called disaster capitalism, which is taking certain people who use opportunities, big business primarily, and states, who use the opportunities of crises to push forward their own agenda, and the losers are working people. We saw that obviously most dramatically with the crash of 2008, where a crash caused by bankers was paid for by working people, with horrendous consequences, not just in this country, but globally. So our amendment in relation to workers is precisely to trumpet the demand that whatever else happens in this drama, working people should not pay the price, shouldn't suffer, shouldn't be asked to pay the bill, and that any agreement or lack of agreement should not be used as a pretext to attack incomes, to attack wages, to demand wage restraint, or to cut public services. And I think that's a very, very important demand. And, you know, particularly given, as previous speakers have mentioned, the fatigue that is setting in with a lot of people who listen to backstops, long backstops, and back long stops, and just wonder, when is this stuff going to end? Because what they want to know is, how is it going to impact on them? What we are setting out in our amendment and in our general attitude to this is our determination to fight on behalf of working people to ensure that they don't end up paying the price as different, frankly unsavoury political forces politically manoeuvre for their own narrow agendas. On the British side, when you look at the leadership of Britain, or the people who have led the narrative on the British exit from the European Union, the threat is obvious in terms of workers' rights, because the particular form of exit from the European Union that these people want is a bargain basement fortress Britain, to essentially lead a race to the bottom at every single level in a way that will detrimentally impact on working people in the interests of narrow sections of British capital who see Brexit as an opportunity to attack workers' rights and advance their own particular interests. Those people have also very cynically used xenophobia, racism, anti-immigrant sentiment as a mechanism to deflect attention away from their own failings and the disaster they have inflicted on many sections of the British working class in order to deflect attention away from their responsibility for that and to attack vulnerable people, immigrants, minorities and so on. So the danger from those people is pretty obvious. The danger that is not so obvious because the narrative that has dominated this debate has been Tory Brexiteers and UKIP and all those sort of people bad, therefore anybody who's on the other side of the debate must necessarily be good. And of course that's not necessarily true. I don't buy into the lesser of two evils theory of politics. I think it's a bad theory of politics. The enemy of my enemy is not necessarily my friend, and certainly when you look at how Europe has similarly treated immigrants, and you look at the thousands of dead drowning in the Mediterranean because of Fortress Europe policies, the idea that Europe are the good guys when it comes to immigration and the treatment of minorities, the vulnerable, it doesn't really stack up. Nor are they the good guys in protecting working people's rights, because as we know, when the crash happened in Europe, they were absolutely determined to make working people pay for it, to the extent of actually threatening to let off financial bombs in Dublin if we dared to burn the bondholders. That's what they said. Trichet will let off a financial bomb in Dublin. So are these our allies? I don't think so. I don't think so at all. Do I trust them with the best interests of working people? I certainly do not. Do I trust them with the whole question of the increased militarisation of Europe, the advance of the European military project around a European army? How could you possibly do that when some of the leading figures in Europe are talking absolutely blatantly now about wanting to move towards a European army? So, yes, it is good that the Irish government, with the support of everybody in this House, has secured a commitment not to have a hard border or to avoid a hard border. But do I trust either of our interlocutors in this to actually guarantee that? I absolutely do not. And I thought it was very telling in that regard that Leo Varadkar said at the weekend, and I quoted it earlier on, but it really has to go on the record. I think in a no-deal scenario it would be very difficult to avoid a hard border. As Ireland is remaining part of the European Union, we would no doubt be required to implement European law. Now that is a very alarming comment. I made this point when this whole debate started, and I've made it successively since. That in the event of a no Brexit deal, or this deal not going through, and there's very real danger this deal won't be agreed no matter what happens in the Dáil tonight, and it will go through the Dáil tonight because we won't oppose it, but that it's going to unravel, not succeed, and there may be a hard Brexit. And if that's the case, what the Taoiseach is saying is pressure is going to come on from Europe to secure the single market, and that their priority will be the market over the question of averting a hard border. That's the unmistakable logic of those words. So that quote is not accurate. Well, I'll read it for the people out there listening. I'll read it. I think in a no-deal scenario it would be very difficult to avoid a hard border. As Ireland is remaining part of the European Union, we would no doubt be required to implement European law. Now that sounds to me pretty clear that pressure will come on to protect the integrity of the market, and therefore the border the issue of averting a hard border could come under pressure. And it is in that context that our second amendment has been put forward, saying that the Irish government should seek a border poll to happen simultaneously north-south if there is any even inkling that there might be a hard border established. And I would say beyond that, beyond the immediate need to do that, because that's on basic democratic grounds. If there's a possibility of a hard border with pressure from Britain or the UK on basic democratic grounds, the people of the North and South should have a right to have a say on whether they are willing to accept that or want that. So that's, to me, a very simple thing that we should say, and to be honest, it's a warning shot to Europe to say if there's any pressure comes on us, we will have to do this. But I would also say that the logic of all of this crisis and the drama is also to say a border doesn't make sense. A border does not make sense. And that this is the time to advance an argument about the benefits of a united Ireland. And, you know, when you look at 500 redundancies in Bombardier this week, you get a sense of how you could begin to advance that argument about the interests of working people, the common interests of working people, uniting in their common interests on the basis that they are workers, and that opposing a border, having unity, and a breaking from the green-orange tribal politics which has divided working people, weakened working people, and resulted in a pretty rotten little statelet up in the north, which has done little for working people, that this is an argument that can gain an echo, not just among people who would see themselves as nationalists, but also among working-class Protestant people. So those are the logics behind our two amendments. I'll just conclude by saying this. While we're not going to oppose it, Taoiseach, nor could we vote for the agreement. And I'll tell you simply why. Precisely because I'm an internationalist. It makes reference to, for example, the need for Britain and the European Union to continue their commitment on the EU-Turkey deal. Now, the EU-Turkey deal is an absolutely rotten, Fortress Europe, anti-immigrant deal. A deal with a rotten, brutal regime that has absolutely no respect for human rights in Turkey. We have essentially used Turkey, paid Turkey to be a buffer against desperate Syrians trying to flee from a horrendous situation in Syria and to keep them out of the European Union. That's referred to the need to maintain that commitment. I couldn't possibly support that in an active way. I'm not going to oppose the deal because it has gotten a commitment on the border issue, but nor am I going to endorse that. Nor am I going to endorse references to EU policies on state aid, which to my mind are a real problem. And I disagree with Deputy Howland on this. EU state aid rules are a problem in terms of us being able to invest in key strategic public enterprise without having to be subject to the rules of competition according to the fiscal treaties, that insist on competition when there are areas, key areas of public investment and public infrastructure where we do not need competition. The last thing we need is competition. What we need is public investment in key services and key infrastructure. So that's our position. Hold fast, no border, north and south, and insist that working people do not pay the price for whatever resolution finally emerges to the Brexit drama.